Naomi Norvice.
Present.
Terry Harper.
Here.
Debbie Duke.
Here.
John Carr. Leslie Thomas by Troy Jackson in the corner.
Here.
Stephen Broden. Mary Jane Avery. Jack Barcroft.
Here.
Chip Powell. Thank you, Chip. Chris Coons.
Here.
Mark DeRazio. Marion Stenko.
Present.
Kiko Conseco.
Here.
Morgan Graham.
Present.
Carlos Cascos.
Here.
Robin Hayes. Lawland, thank you. Steve Evans.
Here.
Robin Cooper.
Here.
Mark Dunham by Robin Cooper, thank you. Dion Starnes.
Here.
Britton Brooks.
Here.
Rhonda Lacey.
Present.
Carol Precure. Thank you all, and Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. I call upon Carol Precure to report the findings of the proxy committee. Is Carol here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, there you are.
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 active proxies, all are in order.
Thank you. Quorum being determined, I call the meeting to order. First order of business, I call upon Marion Stenko to honor recently deceased SREC SD 26 Committeeman Fred Reddick.
Fred was a patriot to the core, but most importantly, he loved his God, his family, and so many of his friends that were an inspiration to him. He dedicated the latter part of his life to his community and service to and his love for our nation, the state of Texas, and locally in San Antonio. We, his family, will certainly miss him, as so many of his friends have likewise expressed. As was Fred's desire and goal, we ask that you continue the fight for freedom and expand on the Republican platform to advance the American way of life. Many blessings to all, and to God be all glory and honor from the Rondell family. I also have a statement from our National Committee woman, Tony Andeshiel. Fred Rondell was a man who I had the great pleasure of working with over many years. He stood up for what he believed in and loved our country, our state, our God, and Barry County. I am always looking for leaders to work with, and he was one of the best. I absolutely loved working with him. Like all that knew him, I was profoundly saddened by his sudden passing. And though he He has reaped his heavenly reward. His physical presence will be deeply missed. Not just by his wonderful family, we who hold close in prayer, but by the community that he impacted in so many ways. Fred was a business owner who shaped the very landscape of his community via his design build company. He was a man of profound faith, who put that faith to work in his community through ministry and volunteerism. And of course, he was a patriot. I mostly knew Fred through political work, which he engaged in with great passion. He was always willing to step up and volunteer his talents and his time to make sure our values, our laws, and our governance would give the best chance of success to his fellow men. He ran for office, he served as a precinct chair, and he was a member of the Republican Party of Texas State Executive Committee. And each of these are volunteer endeavors, and Fred spent his time and resources in them because he was passionate about making the world a better place. I truly believe he left a mark on this world that did exactly that. Signed, Tony Ann Michelle, National Committeewoman, RNC.
Para que yo cada día pueda yo alegría alabarte, Señor.
I bring forward a resolution honoring Fred Alonzo Rangel. Whereas Fred Rangel was born October 21st, 1954 in Corpus Christi, Texas, and whereas he graduated from Memorial High School in San Antonio, Texas, was a member of the Junior ROTC, and earned his degree with honor from the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied design in the environment, which is really architecture, and whereas Fred married his best friend and the love of his life, Debbie, and together raised their beautiful, long-awaited daughter, Amy, who blessed Fred and Debbie with 2 young grandchildren, Joaquin and Luna. And whereas Fred was a lifelong conservative who officially became a Republican 13 years ago and served Senatorial District 26 on the State Republican Executive Committee from 2016 to 2018 and from 2020 until his passing. And whereas Fred was elected to serve the Republican Party of Bexar County as a precinct chair, was a Republican activist, worked on events, ran for San Antonio City Council, and also ran for state representative in a special election. And whereas in 2020, Fred Rangel was elected to serve as State Republican Executive Committee man from Senate District 26 in Bexar County, and served on the Resolutions Committee as a thoughtful and respectful voice. And whereas Fred was active in his community, was a board member of his homeowners association, was a very active member of Westover Hills Church, and a managing partner in ADCO Master Builders. Now there be it resolved that the Republican Party of Texas recognizes the deep and meaningful impact that Fred Rangel had on dedicating his life to Jesus Christ, his family, and the nation that he served. And be it further resolved that the Texas State Republican Executive Committee honors the memory, accomplishments, and legacy of our friend and departed colleague, Fred Rangel, a faithful and respected leader who inspired people throughout the state of Texas through his love, his faith, and his hard work to fight for the Judeo-Christian conservative principles. And be it further resolved that the Republican Party of Texas expresses our deepest condolences to Debbie Rangel, his wife, Amy, his daughter, to Fred's brothers, to his dear mother, Sylvia, and Fred's extended family, to the Republican Party of Bexar County, to the constituents of Senatorial District 26, and to the numerous people who were privileged to know and love Freddie Rangel, respectfully submitted. And if you were with me and Fred always started our Republican Club meetings with, "Today is a great day to be a Republican." And let's all remember that.
Thank you, Marion. Freddie will be very, very, very missed. Can we take a couple seconds to have a moment of silence to remember Freddie Rangel? Thank you. I call upon now Fred Tate to provide the report of the treasurer. Here you got fans. As an accountant, it's pretty good.
I'm going to deliver it from the front of the podium so I can see, since I'm trying to be paperless. So, go ahead and do the next slide. So thanks to Brandon for helping me with this. A couple reminders. I gave my first report to y'all in Lubbock in August. But there's a lot of new members, and so I want to remind you about how I report, which may be a little bit different than you're used to having numbers reported to you. And as I was explaining to our esteemed Chairman Emeritus last night, I report month-end numbers. So numbers, and when I'm comparing like cash balances, the last number I reported to you was on 7/31. And so when we're comparing numbers today, it's going to be against 7/31. It's not going to be some arbitrary date in the middle of the month, because this number is I'm able to pull a report in 2 years' time to look back and actually get a number, whereas you have middle of the month stuff, you can't get back to the same number. It's the best practice. So the other thing to know about this report, when we talk about revenue in this report, I compare to prior periods. Election cycles in Texas run in 2-year increments. So right now, when I'm talking about revenue, I'm going to compare past odd years. At the next meeting, when we're into 2022, we're going to start comparing even years. And so a couple things, if you ever want to know anything about our numbers that are not in this report, all public reports are available. The FEC reports are filed monthly by the 20th of the month, so you can go look at that. There's 2 state reports that are filed, a corporate report and the state PAC report. Those, the next reports will be filed in January. So let's jump into, and by the way, for the new ones, there's a Google Doc, and you should be able to copy that link and go to a Google Doc and reporting, and I'm trying to work with John to get you all the notice monthly when it's updated. And so one other thing to know in these numbers, compared to what's reported to the government about our First Amendment rights, is when I talk about fundraising numbers in here, I'm going to talk about net numbers, which is more accurate for the operation of the party. But when you're talking about reporting to the government, we have to report gross numbers. And so we have fundraising expenses, like somebody gets a $100 credit card transaction, there's $4.50 that's paid to WinRed or Antidote. So you report $100 in here, that donation would be reported at $95.50. Go ahead, Ray. So this kind of shows you from an operational perspective where we stand compared to budget. And so the good news is direct mail has been restored. I think we discussed and found out early in the chairman's tenure that the direct mail program had been suspended. We've also had some unique delays, such as the post office holding mail for 3 months and had a giant bag that had money. And then, unfortunately, the cager, the person that actually opens the mail and does all the reporting, passed away, and there's been an interruption and a delay in us making deposits from a mail perspective. And so this sort of tells you where we stand fundraising against expectations. If you could scroll down. While we're not meeting budgetary expectations, when we get into looking at past years, the numbers are generally higher. A couple things I want to stand out. Obviously, prior years, there were some extraordinary major donations in the prior odd cycle with a specific program from Colorado. We're trailing budget on revenue, but expenses, which we'll get to, are better than expected. I've already talked about the cater issues. I did want to point out the chairman has started driving some major donors. We had this very terrific month of major donations in October. This report shows $160,000 of major donations. But the real number was actually $210,000 because some of the money went into the convention account, which is kind of a separate standalone budget. So what I wanted to show here was the direct mail. If you can see, this is representative of the direct mail program being suspended prior to the chairman coming on board and restarting it, and then we're getting into October, we're seeing it start to resume. And so what I do know is our financial people do have a large bag of mail that they're going through. We did try to get November closed, but because of that mail, it didn't, which is why I'm reporting October numbers, which is the truth, because I don't want to have any confusion over the numbers. I want to report one version. So we go to the next slide. So we get into expenses. Generally speaking, it looks really yellow on this, but when I prepared it, it's green. And so when you look at it on your computer, it's going to be green. Green is good, right? It means that we're spending less money than we had budgeted, which is making up a lot of that shortfall from a revenue perspective. So the party is doing a pretty good job on a year-to-date basis of spending less money. I know John is managing money. I know Steve and I were chatting in the hall last night about certain things, and he complimented me on paying all bills at the end of the month. And I said, that's easy because that's John Beckman. So compliment to John, because that's the conservative way to do this. We can move to the next slide. So we're down. So if you have a net basis, right, from the fundraising shortfall to the year-to-date expense variation, we're still short $128,000 on the full year-to-date basis through October. So that's where we stand kind of on the net basis. If you scroll down, we're starting to get into a little analysis. So how does our fundraising look compared to prior periods, right? And so this shows year-to-date contributions in prior odd years against this year. So this year we've raised $1.5 million. And so if you think about it on a trend line, we're actually doing better historically. Yes, I know it's not inflation adjusted over many years, but there's only so much time I can do to put in these reports. And I like working in absolute numbers anyway, so if we can go to the next slide. So generally speaking, is at least we're higher, right? And then when we look at this year compared to prior years, these are full year totals, right? So in 2011, from an operational perspective, the party raised $1.1 million. Right now through October, we're at $1.5 million. So in general terms, and then you have this one huge project driving this year. In general terms, that trend line is still up, right? And so what we have to do is make sure that we carefully manage our cash, right? Spend less money than we bring in so we have a surplus. So go to the next slide, please. So there's a little analysis kind of tells you the makeup of how the money is spending. Again, the major donor program from 2019, but you can see the direct mail is contributing. Personally, I was surprised when I came on to treasurer to get in, to start looking at the numbers and where the money is coming from. You can see how that is contributing. In the past, events have been a significant driver of the party. There's a lot of reasons why that's not as fruitful as it been in the past, and one of those is going to be the pandemic, but that's definitely something we have to have a blend of revenue like any good business. So go to the next slide. So a couple things. Final part of the report, we're going to talk about cash, right? And so our report is $743,000 of cash available in 7/31. 10/31, we had $749,000. It's $6,000 different. So you'll notice if you scroll down, we get into the actual cash balances. You can see how the cash position has changed throughout the whole year. If you can continue to scroll down. And so these are numbers that have past been reported to the SREC. Like there was a 3/25 date, stuff like that. I'm not going to do that going forward. If you continue, if you go to the actual first slide, the graph, please. I'll let you get into it, right? And so what you can see is where the balances by program is. If you can go to the final one. What you're going to see in the reports and stuff like that is the convention account here, right? The state account has been topped up. We have a $10,000 contribution limit in the federal money. All the money comes into the federal account. Anything over the limit gets transferred down to the state. So what you're seeing is, if you only look at the federal reports, it looks really dire. But what you're actually happening is a lot of that money is getting transferred down. Our cash position is fairly stable. It's just been allocated into a different place, and that has to do with the change of the different types of donors. And so, we're pretty stable. We had a great October. I hope for November is at least as good. And then of course we're going to have holidays and stuff like that. And so that's the report. I'll be available for questions if you have any. Thank you. opportunity, sick and bears.
Does anyone have any questions for Fred or for me regarding Fred's report? Yes, Pastor Rose.
SB 23, does your report reflect any contribution from the Republican National?
The Republican National Committee, it does it?
Well, yes, because they give us money to pay for some of their expenses, and so there is a margin that we make on that. So in other words, we spend $7,500 on salaries, they give us $10,000. So yes, it does include those numbers. So they're giving us money, and we're also paying for some of their staff.
They give us money to pay their staff.
And use our facilities, our offices, all of that.
It generally goes in and out the same month, but there is a slight margin that will be reflected, but it's not large amounts.
It's minimal, but it is generally possible.
Is there a question over here? Yes, Steve.
In regards to the bills that were not paid immediately, what was that?
Well, some of that is when we actually get the bills, right? Sometimes the rent bill comes in at the very end of the month, right? And it physically takes a day or two to process a check, right? There's definitely some of that, and there was an issue. If you look in the report, like there's 1 month that drove me crazy, we had to pay rent twice. Well, rent was skipped somewhere along the lines of 2 years ago getting paid 1 month, which benefited a prior period that ultimately got caught up. And what had been happening is you were carrying that rent as an unpaid obligation every month in a report, which also creates more work for CFX, right? Instead of just taking the bill in one time and paying it. Every time you have an unpaid obligation, you have to report it 1 month as unpaid, and report it next month as paid. Plus then unpaid, you can continue to do double data entry for a one-time bill.
What is the Irish history of
Well, we're going to win by 24.
Mr. Chairman.
I just want to say, Fred, these are good as financials. I've seen 40 years that I've known the SREC meeting.
Thank you.
And you have added.
That means a lot, especially for you, and for y'all that know, Steve and I have known each other for a very long time. Very long time. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Nothing else? Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it. I will add an addenda to Fred's very good explanation as well. When you see the federal and state money, it does reflect the larger donations that have come in the state account. The depletion of the federal account has come because of that 3-month period that Fred reflected where the mail program was suspended. So what you have coming in generally is mail, which is all federal funds. And then you have larger donations which flow down to the state account. And that was reflecting the 3-month lag in those federal donations, which now has been rectified and should be fairly stable going forward. When we do the budget later, you'll see the mix we expect between those mail funds, email funds, those small funds, and large donor funds, which should be about 2 to 1 in favor of the federal going forward. So just to put that together. I call upon Dr. Tim Wesley to provide the report of the historian.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, I am going to share some information with you all, of course, on history. One of the things that I've been privileged to do is go out and speak to people about historical events. Recently, the city of Kerrville, with the Daughters of the American Revolution, invited me out to speak about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for the centennial anniversary. And that was an excellent event of which I was able to share great historical information with that group. And they decided to cover it in their daily times as well. And that went off extremely well because we were able to honor those that honored us by giving their all. In addition to that, I've been called out to the Alamo on several occasions to speak about history, about the Alamo, and that's what I will share with you all with my less than 10 minutes I have left with you all. Just a reminder that as we look at history, we can learn a lot from that history as individuals, and as an SREC, you can learn a lot from that history. If we think about the Battle of the Alamo, there were three names that would stand out right off: David Crockett, James Bowie, and Lieutenant Colonel Travis. As I was summoned to the Alamo as late as October of this year to give a historical recollection, I reminded people that the great state of Texas is the only state to have flown the flag of 6 separate nations: Spain, France, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, Confederate States of America, and the United States of America. I reminded them that the three major purposes that Spain wanted to set up missions in the area: 1 was to evangelize, 2, colonize, and 3, defend the northern border of the Spanish Empire of the Americas. The Alamo, you hear about that often, but many don't hear about the fact that the Alamo was a church that was known to many as a shrine. To defend the land, we see that there were some soldiers sent there. We hear about the Alamo, but we don't hear about the fact that it was a 2-story military hospital, the first hospital in Texas. This is history that we should be proud of. When we hear about the Alamo, we may not hear about the fact that it took the rebellion of Stephen F. Austin in 1835 to say that we can capture and keep San Antonio. In 1836, formally declaring independence. It was a story that was told, and I'll share that story briefly. General Sam Houston sent word that he was simply going to tell Jim Bowie to destroy the Alamo, return with the men and the artillery, because it cannot be defended. But Jim Bowie decided to think otherwise, and against all odds, decided to stand up. That's what I challenge you all this morning as an SREC, looking at it from a historical perspective. Can you stand up like these men? Lieutenant Colonel William Travis, he was a commander of about 200 defenders. Keep in mind, like you all, half these defenders were volunteers. At this time, Santa Anna showed up with the Mexican army. They arrived to lay siege, and the defenders retreated to the Alamo. And there was a red flag. Many of you may have heard about this red flag. And I challenge you all as an SREC this morning, that red flag is being waved at the great state of Texas now. This red flag signifies from General Santa Anna that no lives would be spared or even surrendered, and that everyone was going to die. But Lieutenant Colonel Travis, with 32 brave men that added to the 200, came from Gonzales. You all have heard the saying, "Come and take it." They came from Gonzales with that same come and take it mentality that I challenged the SREC with this morning. When they showed up, they knew that their lives were going to be at risk. They prepared to give their lives for freedom's cause. On one particular night, March 5th, Lieutenant Colonel Travis drew a line on the ground, or in the sand, as some may say. And he challenged the people, as I challenged the SREC this morning from a historical perspective. Those prepared to give their lives for freedom's cause, come over to me. History tells us that every man crossed that line. One slipped away in the night. Jim Bowie, sick with a debilitating illness, asked his men to pick him up and carry him across that line. Defenders wanted freedom and were willing to die for it. So for 13 days they fought with everything they had. For 13 days they fought with every fiber of their being. For 13 days they fought. And ultimately they were overcome. But this battle would lead to fighting for its freedom and independence. That freedom and independence is for Texas. Word spread about those new recruits, and Texas Army grew. Less than 2 months later, General Sam Houston crushed the Mexicans in the Battle of San Jacinto. As they ran into battle, they remembered that battle cry and they shouted, "Remember the Alamo." I challenge you all this morning as an SREC to look at history and let us not forget about our history. Let us not repeat the history unless it's worthy to be repeated. And remember, as those battle warriors taught us, the cost is too great. I close with a couple of thoughts. It was 200 voices at the Alamo that history tells us they said, "We refuse to quit." It was patriots saying, "My Texas, my freedom, and future generations are worth my life." History tells us that a rally cry to the world said, "I may be the underdog, but get ready for the fight of your lives. If you stand down now, it'll be more difficult for you to stand up later." SREC, history tells us that the battle today is about freedom and ensuring elected and appointed tyrants are held accountable to we the people. It's about the people drawing a line in the sand and saying, "We refuse to quit. We will fight for freedom and liberty at all costs." Those defenders taught us that it only takes a few to stand up and fight, even against all odds in the face of adversity. Fight for the patriots next to you and for the freedoms of the next generation. See something greater than the right now. Have more courage than fear. Think about others more than you think about self. This is selfless sacrifice. It's time for not only the SREC, but it's time for all Texans that believe in this great state and that believe in this nation to indeed stand up. It's time for Texas to stand up. We must not stop today, but continue tomorrow and beyond with one resounding voice as we think about history and the future. Remember the Alamo. God bless you all.
Call upon Rachel Cooper and Emily Cook to present the report of the General and Assistant General Counsel. Do I hear? Do I hear a motion to go into executive session? Okay, motion by Bill Fairbrother, second by David Covey. Any objections to going into executive session? Hearing none. We're going into executive session. Will the Sergeant at Arms please clear the room of non-SREC members and those entitled to the